Hey solo gamers, thanks for checking out How's It Play Solo. I'm Mac Kern. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Lagrange. I'm going to do a quick overview of the rules and the structure of a round, and then I'm going to dive into the changes implemented in the solo variant of the game. One of the interesting things about this game is that most of your resources are represented by these markers in your player color. And depending on where they're located, they represent different goods. So up here, they might be olives, but over here, they are grain. They can be used as trade commodities. It's also worth noting that anytime I refer to harvest goods, I'm talking about either olives, grain, or grapes. Lagrange takes place over 6 rounds, and each round consists of 4 phases. Before I go over those phases in detail, I want to point out that there are some flexible actions that can be performed pretty much anytime it's your turn. And those actions include spending a trade commodity to gain 4 coins, or to gain 2 unique harvest goods, or to play or draw a card, or to add a pig to your stables, or finally to upgrade 2 of your goods for free. Also, you can freely buy most goods, so if you don't have wheat and you need some, you can pay 3 coins to buy it. Or if you have too much wheat, you can sell that wheat for 1 coin. You can upgrade wheat to food, you can upgrade olives to food, you can pay to upgrade grapes to wine, you can upgrade your pigs to cured meat. So there's just a lot of flexibility with those actions. The first thing you do in the first phase of a round is play a card and then draw up to your hand limit. Cards can be played in one of 4 ways. You can play a card as a field. So if I played this card as a field, I would slide it under my mat, and this is now a wheat field. Alternately, I can play cards as helpers to gain use of their ability, and these abilities are color coded. They kind of correspond with the phases on the player aid. So this ability is active during the second phase of a round. If you play a card as a helper, you slide it under your mat and you have access to that. This one can only be used once per round, so once I've used it, I place a marker on it to denote that I can't use it for the rest of the round. You can also play cards as market barrows, and so if I play this card as a market barrow, that's just kind of a contract. I can deliver goods to this card later in the round, and once I fulfill that contract, I'll gain some points and some other benefits. Finally, you can play a card as a farm extension. Slide it under your mat over here, and these increase your hand limit. Sometimes they give you extra deliveries during the third phase of the game, and they can give you some consistent revenue as well. Also, some of them expand your stable so that you're able to store more pigs. Normally, there's no additional cost associated with playing a card, but when you play a card as a farm extension, depending on how many farm extensions you've already played, you have to pay a number of unique resources. So my first farm extension, I can pay a victory point coin or any of the other goods in the game. The second one, I have to pay 2 unique goods, and so on as I play more extension cards. Next, you receive revenue, and over the course of the game, you can acquire some sources of revenue. Like this card gives me 1 coin every revenue phase, but there are some other ways that I can gather money and resources. You receive those during this phase. After that, you populate all of your empty fields. So if I have an empty olive field, I put a marker on that field to represent that there is now an olive in that field. Also, if I had 2 pigs and an empty stable space, the pigs would breed and I would get a 3rd pig. Finally, I have the opportunity to buy a roof tile. These get more expensive over the course of the game, but there's 1 of these available for every player, and basically I pay a coin to buy this tile, and anytime it's my turn, I can flip it over to use its benefits. So some of them provide you with money. This one gives you a free pig. This one lets you play or draw a card. And also, when you buy these, you place them on your roof, and once you cover up these ones later in the game, they also give you victory points when you place those. During the second phase of a round, you roll dice equal to the number of players times 2, and then add 1 to that. So in a 2-player game, you're rolling 5 dice. You assign them along the board based on the result, and then you take turns drafting these dice to use their abilities. The remaining die, after each player has chosen 2 dice, there will be 1 die left, and that die is available for everyone to use. So these actions include gaining a pig, playing or drawing a card, or receiving a harvest good, receiving 2 unique harvest goods, gaining 4 coins, upgrading goods, or moving up on the siesta track, or making a delivery or gaining 2 coins. So there's a lot of flexibility there. During the third phase of a round, each player secretly chooses and plays a donkey tile. At the beginning of the game, you have 4 of these. Each one has a number of sombreros and a number of donkeys on it. So you choose one, you play it, and you immediately move up the siesta track a corresponding number of spaces. And the siesta track is used to determine player order, which changes immediately. After everyone has moved up the track, you switch player order. And after you do that, starting with the first player, you get to make deliveries. There's a couple different ways to make deliveries, but I will note first that once you play this tile, you've spent it, and it's not available to you until the start of the 4th round of the game. You get all of the tiles that you've spent back, and then you have access to those to use for the remaining 3 rounds of the game. When you make a delivery, you have the choice of delivering to a market barrow on your farm, or you can deliver to a building on the central board. So when you're making a delivery to a market barrow, you just take a corresponding good from your farm and you place it on the card. So I can take an olive from my field and place it here. I can take a grain from my field and do the same. Once I have delivered to each of the depicted goods, as a reward, I receive 1 trade commodity, and I also get to place on a space on the central market. And this corresponds with the number shown here. So if I place on a 5 space, the first thing I do is any spaces, any opponent markers on adjacent spaces with a lower value get removed. So I place on a 5, I get to remove this opponent marker that was on a number 3 space, and I score, first I score 5 points because I placed on a 5 value space, and then I score 1 point for each player marker that I remove with my placement. Delivering to buildings on the central board works in a similar way to delivering to market barrows on your farm. So I take markers for the depicted goods, in this case a trade commodity, and I place it on an unoccupied line in that building. So that line is my line to work with. Once I have fulfilled all of the depicted goods in that building, I place one of my markers in this space next to the building to show that I've completed the building, and I score a number of points equal to the current round. So if I finish it in the first round, it's only worth 1 point. If I finish it in the last round of the game, it's worth 6 points. I also receive the marker associated with that building. These have a one-time, an immediate ability, and then they also have a continuous ability. So this one, when I finish that building, I immediately receive a trade commodity, and then I also receive a trade commodity during each round's revenue phase. Also, 3 of the 6 buildings are randomly locked at the beginning of the game. If you're the first person to finish deliveries to one building, you get to unlock the next building. So you remove the lock marker from it, and then you also receive a victory point as a reward for opening that building for everyone to use. After everyone has finished all of the deliveries allotted to them by their donkey tiles, starting with the first player, everyone has the opportunity to purchase additional deliveries. The number of times you can do this is restricted by the number of additional delivery icons you have, and most of these are granted via playing cards as farm extensions. During the 4th phase of a round, you score 1 victory point for every space you occupy in the market. You score points corresponding with your position on the siesta track, so you can score between 0 and 3 points. From that, you reset position on the siesta track, and finally you set out the next round's roof tiles. So you play through 6 rounds. At the end of the 6 rounds, you have the opportunity to sell any leftover goods on your farm, and you can convert money. Every 5 gold is worth 1 victory point. Whoever has the most points at the end of the game wins. The solo game is pretty similar to the multiplayer game. For the most part, you set everything up like a 2-player game, and there's a dummy player that only takes actions during the dice drafting and the transportation parts of a round. So you still have to determine player order with your donkey tiles every round, and if you don't reach the 3rd space on the siesta track, then you're considered to be 2nd player. If you reach that 3rd space, you're 1st player, and the dummy player is the 2nd player. So during the dice drafting phase, anytime it's the dummy player's turn, in the first 3 rounds of the game, the dummy player always drafts the lowest numbered die. In the last 3 rounds of the game, the dummy player drafts the highest numbered die. And so player order matters here. If I'm 2nd player, then the dummy player is going to draft that lowest numbered die. I can draft a die. The dummy player drafts the lowest number, I draft a die, and then of course I can still use the action associated with the last remaining die. During the delivery phase, you reveal the top card of the deck, and you check the value on the market barrow section, and the dummy player places on a corresponding market square or a market space. And there's rules for this placement. The primary goal, the dummy player is always going to place where he can knock off the most of my markers. If he's not able to knock off any of my markers, he's just going to place somewhere that makes it harder for me to knock his pieces off, and there's some rules that explain how to accomplish that. I think one of Lagrange's strong points as a solo game is the way the dummy player emulates the interaction you would have with a real-life opponent. Lagrange is not a super interactive game to begin with, but you do have the way that player order matters during the dice drafting phase. You have the opportunity to mess with your opponents a little bit when you're placing in the central market, and both of those elements make it to the solo game. The dice drafting by the dummy player is pretty predictable and it's pretty easy to work around, but I really like the way that the dummy player places in the market, and I like the way that turn order matters still. If you're taking a market heavy strategy, it might benefit you to place after your opponent, because that lets you target more of their pieces and protects your recently placed piece from being targeted by them. So I like how that is retained in the solo game. My only complaint with the solo variant is that there's no inherent goal. You're just working to beat your own highest score, and I don't think that the gameplay suffers. It's mostly unchanged, but I sometimes find myself wishing that I had a human opponent, just so I could kind of gauge my score against theirs. But every bit of engine building and every opportunity to pull off combos, those all make it to the solo game fully intact, and they're just as satisfying to play. So, overall, I think that La Granja is a really great game, and I definitely think it's worth checking out.